Mark's family gathered around our Thanksgiving table, waiting to watch him humiliate me again. It had become as traditional as my mother's pecan pie. This year, he didn't disappoint. Even Hood do better, he said, pushing away the dessert I'd perfected for hours while his siblings laughed. But our 10-year-old son, Ethan, had finally seen enough. 5 words from a child's mouth, "Tell them about New Native," and my husband's confident smirk vanished like smoke. I didn't know what he meant, but Mark's panic told me our son had just handed me the key to a door I'd been afraid to open. Sometimes the smallest voices reveal the biggest lies. The November air had that crisp quality that made everything feel urgent, and Claire Morrison felt it keenly as she moved through her kitchen with practiced efficiency. At 35, she had the kind of grace that came from years wrapped of making everything look effortless, even when it wasn't. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and her efforts, the one with tiny violets that her mother had given her, was already dusted with flour. Today mattered more through Timber Days. The annual post-Thanksgiving dessert gathering with Mark's family had become something of a team's, one that Claire both dreaded and felt compelled to perfect. She glanced at the clock on the microwave. 3:30. They'd arrive at 6, which gave her just enough time if everything went breached smoothly. The pecan pie sat cooling on the marble counter, its surface a perfect amber glaze that caught the afternoon light streaming through the window. It was her mother's recipe, passed down through 3 generations of Southern women who knew their way around a kitchen. Claire had made it dozens of times, but today she'd been especially careful with each measurement. The pecans were arranged in perfect concentric circles, the filling unequivocal, not too runny, not too firm. "Mom, you've checked that pie like 10 times already," Ethan said from the doorway, his 10-year-old frame leaning against the door jamb. He had Mark's dark practition but Claire's green eyes, and right now those eyes held a mixture of amusement and concern that seemed too mature for his age. Claire smiled at her son, too, the genuine warmth she felt for him, temporarily pushing aside her anxiety. "Just making sure it's perfect. Sweetheart, you know how your titular Janet likes to notice every little detail." Ethan walked over and presumption at the pie. "It looks amazing. Way better than the store-bought stuff Grandma brings sometimes and pretends she made." "Ethan," Claire said, trying to sound stern but failing to hide her smile. "We brush don't say things like that, even if they're true," he asked. And there was something in his voice that made Claire Principal's pause. Her son had been noticing things lately, picking up on the undercurrents, terratas that ran through their family gatherings like invisible tripwires. Before she could respond, she heard Mark's BMW pull S into the garage. Her shoulders tensed automatically, a response she developed over the past year. As her husband's criticisms had grown sharper, more frequent, she heard the car door slam unnamed the necessary, which meant he'd had a difficult day at the office. Mark entered through the mudroom, his upscale despite the long day. At 38, he still had the athletic build from his college lacrosse days, and his confidence-filled rooms the way expensive cologne did, SSMI, and impossible to ignore. He set his briefcase down with a thud, and loosened his tie, his eyes scanning the kitchen with the same analytical gaze he used for financial portfolios. "Smells like you've been busy," he said, and Claire couldn't tell if it was a compliment or merely an observation. These days, she could never be sure. I wanted everything to be nice for tonight, Claire replied, keeping her S voice light. Your family always. My family always expects too much. I know. Mark interrupted, pouring himself a scotch from the bar cart they kept in the corner. That's why I don't understand why you insist on trying so hard. It's just dessert, Claire, not a state dinner. The dismissiveness in his tone stung, but Claire had learned to swallow these small hurts, like bitter pills. 6 months ago, she might have defended herself, reminded him that his muzzle mother had specifically requested homemade desserts, that last year's slightly overdone tart had been the subject of pointed comments for weeks afterward. But she'd learned that defending herself only led to longer arguments, and with Ethan in the house, she preferred to keep the peace. I'll go shower, Mark said, already heading toward the stairs. Try not to burn anything this time. After he left, Ethan moved closer to his mother. Mom, why does Dad say stuff like that? Claire's hands stilled on the dish towel she'd been folding and refolding. How a 10-year-old that sometimes love curdled into something else, something harder to define. That the man who'd once brought her flowers every Friday now seemed to find fault in everything she did. Sometimes people say things they don't mean when they're stressed, she said. Finally, the explanation feeling hollow even to her impending ears. Ethan didn't look convinced, but he didn't push. Instead, he helped her set the dining room table, carefully placing the good china, the Wedgwood pattern that had been a wedding gift from Mark's parents, with more precision than most 10-year-olds would bother with. They worked in comfortable override Slayer, found herself grateful for his steady presence. By 5:45, Claire had changed into the navy dress Mark had bought her last Christmas. Conservative, expensive, and utterly forgettable. She'd learned that standing out at these gatherings only invited more scrutiny. Her makeup was subtle, her jewelry minimal. She looked exactly like what Mark's family expected. Appropriate. The doorbell rang at 6 sharp. Harold and Janet Morrison had never been late to anything in their lives, and they weren't about to start now. Claire opened the door to find them standing there like a matched set of bookends. Both silver-haired, both wearing expressions of mild disapproval that seemed to be their default setting. Claire, Janet said, air kissing her cheek, non-teenaging not to actually make contact. The house looks clean. It was classic Janet, a compliment wrapped in traverse, or perhaps the other way around. Claire had given up trying to decode her mother-in-law's true meanings years ago. Harold handed her his coat without a word, already looking past her toward the living room, where Mark was the bar. In Harold's world, men talked to men about important things, and women handled coats and appetizers. Sophie and Alan arrived minutes later, breezing in with the kind arrogance that came from never having to doubt their place in the world. Sophie, Mark's younger sister, was a carbon copy of Janet, 33 years old but already perfecting the art of subtle condescension. Alan, the baby at 30, still acted like the golden child, white who could do no wrong. Claire, Sophie, exclaimed with false brightness, "You, unrest. That must be nice, having all day to prepare for these things." The Ragasiachian hung in the air like smoke that Claire did nothing all day, that her life as a homemaker was one long vacation. Never mind that she left her marketing career 2 years ago to focus on raising Ethan when Mark's increasing work demands meant someone needed to be home. Never mind that she managed the household, the finances, the scheduling, everything that kept their lives running smoothly, while Mark focused on his unfinished career. "Let me take your coat," Claire said, instead of responding to the dig. She learned that silence was often the thence against Sophie's barbs. As she hung the coats in the hall closet, she caught a snippet of conversation from the dining room. Sophie's voice pitched just low enough that she front-line thought Claire couldn't hear. "Let's see if she messes this up again." Janet's response was a soft laugh, the publishes that agreed without having to say the words. Claire's cheeks burned, but she forced herself to take a deep breath. Last year's tart hadn't even been that burnt, just slightly darker, immutable around the edges than ideal. But in the Morrison family, slightly imperfect might as well be completely ruined. She returned to find everyone seated at the dining table, Mark holding court with a story about a particularly profitable pear trade he'd made that week. Ethan sat quietly beside her, and under the table, she felt his small hand squeeze hers. "It's okay, Mom," he whispered so quietly, only she could hear. "I like your cooking best." The simple kindness of it nearly undid her. She squeezed back, drawing strength from this little boy who somehow understood more than he should have to. Dinner progressed smoothly enough. The roasted chicken was perfectly done, the vegetables properly seasoned. Even Janet couldn't find fault with the autumn salad Claire had prepared. Conversation flowed around topics that the Morrisons considered appropriate: stock markets, real estate values, the declining quality of the country club's new chef. Claire contributed little, focusing instead on making sure glasses stayed full and communicates never sat empty too long. It was easier to be the silent facilitator than to risk saying something that would be dissected later. Finally, it was time for dessert. Claire stood smoothing her dress and headed to the kitchen. Behind her, she heard Mark's voice louder than necessary. This year, Claire insisted on doing it all herself. There was something in his tone that made her stomach tighten. It wasn't pride or affection. It was more like a warning or, improperly, a setup. She returned with the pie, setting it in the center of the table with careful precision. "Oh, Janet," said in that way that meant she was about to say something cutting. "How traditional." "It was my mother's recipe," Claire said, quietly, beginning to cut and serve slices. "Well, let's hope it lives up to the family legacy," Harold said, accepting his plate with the air of a judge about to deliver a verdict. Everyone took their first bites in relative silence. Claire watched Mark, especially, saw him take that slow, deliberate bite, saw the way his freight expression shifted. He set his fork down with a soft clink against the china, and a smirk spread across his face, the same expression he wore when he was about to close a deal that would hurt someone else, but benefit him. "Even the dog could do better," he said, pushing the plate away with theatrical disgust. The Ragaz words hung in the air for a moment before Sophie's laugh broke the silence, sharp and delighted. Alan snorted into his wineglass. Harold shook his head with exaggerated disappointment. Even Annette allowed herself a small smile of vindication. Claire felt the heat rise, too showcased a burning sensation that spread down her neck and across her chest. She looked down at her own untouched slice, unable to meet anyone's eyes. The pie was perfect. She knew it was perfect. She'd tasted the filling, tested the crust, but that didn't matter now. Mark had pronounced judgment, and in this family, his word was law. Beside her, she heard Ethan's spoon clink against his dessert plate harder than necessary. She could feel his anger freshwater radiating off him in waves. This 10-year-old boy who wanted to defend his mother but didn't know how. "Perhaps we should move to the living room for coffee," Claire managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "Lee the pie," Haz said, still smirking. "Well, let the dog have it later. At least someone might enjoy it." More laughter rippled. Undefeated. Irritable. And in that moment, Claire felt something inside her shift. It wasn't breaking exactly. It was more like a clarity, a sudden, sharp focus, the perfect family image she'd worked so trembling to maintain. The careful facade she constructed to keep everyone happy, to keep the peace. She could see it for brushing what it really was. A prison she'd built for herself. Bar by bar, compromise by curry. She stood mechanically, beginning to clear plates. Her movements automatic, but her mind was somewhere else entirely, processing this moment, this culmination of 1,000 small Breton's cruelties. The perfect family image hadn't just cracked. It was crumbling. And for the first time, Claire wasn't sure she wanted to rebuild it. Mark was still talking, warming to his theme now that he had an appreciative audience. "You know, they offer cooking classes at the community center," he said, his breakthrough dripping with false concern. "Maybe that would be a good use of all that free time you have, honey. Guess still got a lot to learn." Sophie tittered behind her hand. "Oh, Mark, Gangnam, or terrible," she said in a way that made it clear she found him delightful. "Just trying to help," Mark replied, news reaching for his wine glass. "I mean, we can't all be naturally talented in the administering. Some people need more instruction." Claire's hands trembled slightly as she stacked the dessert administrates. Each word was another small cut, and Mark knew exactly where to aim them. After all, he'd had years of practice. That's when she heard it, the sharp clink of metal against china. Everyone turned toward the sound. Ethan had set his spoon down with deliberate force, the sound cutting through the cruel laughter like a blade. The 10-year-old sat straighter in his chair, his green eyes moving from one adult face to another. There was something in his expression that Claire had never seen before. Not anger exactly, but a kind of determined resolution that seemed far too mature for his years. The room fell silent, waiting. Even Mark seemed to rush sense that something had shifted, his smirk fading slightly as he looked at his son. Ethan's voice, when it came, was calm and clear. "Tell them about New York." 5 words. Just 5 simple words. But they might as well have been a grenade rolled across the mahogany table. The silence that followed was different from before, thicker, charged with something electric and dangerous. Submerged Mark's face transform in slow motion, the smirk vanishing completely, his skin paling beneath his perpetual tan, his hand tightening around his wine glass until his knuckles went white. "What?" Mark's voice came out. "Makers." Nothing like his usual confident baritone. Ethan didn't elaborate. He simply picked up his spoon again and took another bite of pie, chewing slowly, his eyes never leaving his father's face. Claire felt her heart racing. She had no idea what Ethan meant, but Mark's reaction told her everything she needed to know. This wasn't nothing. This was something. Something significant enough to drain the color from her husband's face. Janet was the first to recover, her sharp voice cutting through the tension. "What's in New York, Mark?" Mark's laugh came out forced, hollow. "Just some work trip. You know how kids are, they get confused about." "I'm not confused," Ethan said. Still eating his pie with mechanical precision, Alan leaned forward, his eyes bright with the kind of interest he usually reserved for gossip about other people's failures. "What happened on that trip, big brother?" "Nothing happened," Mark said too quickly, too defensively. "It was just a standard business trip. Meetings with clients." Ethan must have overheard something and misunderstood, but his eyes weren't meeting anyone's gaze now. They darted around the room like a trapped animal looking for an exit. Claire had seen Mark in dozens of whichever pressure situations, important presentations, difficult clients, market crashes that cost millions. She'd never this working in him. "Ethan," Sophie said, her voice honeyed with false sweetness, "what exactly did you mean about New York?" Ethan set down his spoon again, this time gently. He looked at Aunt with those two knowing green eyes. "Dad knows," he said simply, then turned to Claire. "May I be excused, Mom?" Claire nodded numbly, watching her unleashed son push back his chair and walk calmly from the room. The soft sound of his footsteps on the stairs seemed unnaturally loud in the silence he left behind. "Well," Harold said, his voice unmarried with disapproval, though Claire couldn't tell if it was directed at Mark or at Ethan's breach of dinner table, unnamed. That was unusual. "Kids," Mark said, attempting another laugh that dyed his throat. "You know how they are, always picking up bits and pieces of things and creating stories." But the damage was done. The comfortable cruelty of moments before had evaporated, replaced by something uncertain and suspicious. Janet's eyes narrowed as she studied her son, and Claire recognized the look. It was the same one she used, luggage, when she suspected the housekeeper of stealing silver. "Perhaps we should have that coffee now," Mark said, already wrapped, standing, eager to escape the dining room that had become a trap. "I'll help Claire with sit down," Harold commanded, and Mark sank back into his chair like a chastised schoolboy. "Claire can manage the coffee. She always does." Claire moved Electri toward the kitchen on autopilot, but her mind was racing. What did Ethan know? What had he seen or heard? And more importantly, why had Mark reacted like he'd been caught? As she prepared to the coffee service, she could hear the strained conversation from the dining room. Sophie trying to fill the silence with chatter about her latest shopping trip. Alan making jokes that fell flat, Janet's occasional sharp questions that Mark deflected with increasing desperation. When she returned with the coffee, the atmosphere was still thick with submissive questions. Mark jumped up to help her, something he never did. Inability taking the tray from her hands with exaggerated care. "Thank you, darling," he said loudly, performatively, his hand lingering on her arm. "You've worked so hard tonight." Claire wanted to pull away from his touch, but she was acutely watch-aware of everyone watching. So she smiled the same empty smile she'd perfected years of family gatherings and let him play the devoted husband. The rest of the evening crawled, bedtime by an uncomfortable fits and starts. Harold tried to steer conversation toward safe topics, the economy, the weather, anything but New York. But it was like trying to ignore an elephant in the room. Every pause in conversation seemed to echo with Ethan's 5 words. Finally, mercifully, Janet announced it was time to leave. "We have an early morning tomorrow," she said, though tomorrow was Sunday and Claire knew they had nothing planned. The goodbyes were stilted, formal. Sophie hugged Claire, but Shapiro, what was that about? In her ear. Claire could only shrug, playing thinly ignorant, even as her mind churned with possibilities. Alan clapped Mark on the shoulder, but there was something knowing in his expression. "Take care, brother," he said, and it sounded more like a warning than a farewell. After Traverse, Mark immediately went to his office, closing the door firmly behind him. Claire stood in the hallway, listening to the muffled sound of his voice. He was on the phone, speaking urgently, but too quietly for her to make out the words. She climbed the stairs slowly, stopping at Ethan's room. He was in bed but still awake, his face illuminated by the soft glow of his nightlight. "Ethan," she said softly, crimson on the edge of his bed. "What was that about? What happened in New York?" He looked up at her with those serious green eyes. "I'll tell you later, Mom, I promise. I couldn't let him keep staffers to you. Not tonight." Claire felt tears prick at her eyes. Her Kremlin 10-year-old son had tried to protect her, had found some weapon to use against his father's cruelty. She should probably scold him for speaking out of turn at dinner, for creating a scene. Instead, she leaned down and kissed his forehead. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too, Mom, and, Mom, your pie was perfect. Grandma's just jealous. She can't make anything that good." Claire smiled, despite everything, tucking the blanket around him. But as she left his room, the smile faded. She needed to know what Ethan knew. She needed to understand what had made Mark look like his world was collapsing. Because if she was with herself, she'd seen that look before. Glimpses of it when he came home late, when certain phone calls came through, when she asked too many questions about his business trips. She'd ignored it, rationalized it, told herself she was imagining things. But Ethan's 5 words had changed everything. The cracks in their perfect family image weren't just visible now, they were widening. And Claire was no longer sure she wanted to hold it all together. The house felt different after everyone left, like the air itself was holding secrets. Mark had barricaded himself in his office, and Claire could hear the occasional burst of muffled conversation through the door. She busy herself with cleaning up, but her movements were mechanical, her mind elsewhere. After loading the dishwasher and wiping down the counters, she noticed Mark had left a suit jacket draped over a kitchen chair. Without really thinking about it, she picked it up to hang it in the closet. As she did, a receipt fluttered from the inside embraced pocket, landing face up on the floor. The Carroll Hotel, Manhattan, dated November 12th, just 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. Claire's hands stilled. Mark had told her he was in Chicago that week, meeting with potential investors for a new fund. She remembered because he'd componised Ethan's school play, the one where Ethan played Thomas Edison. She'd sent him a video and he texted back that termed sorry to miss it, but the meetings were running late. She heard Mark's office door open and quickly shoved the receipt into her pocket, busying herself with hanging his jacket just as he appeared in the doorway. "Claire," he said, and his voice had that forced casualness that meant he was about to lie. "About what Ethan said." "It's fine," she interrupted, not ready for whatever story he was preparing. "Kids say strange things sometimes." He studied her face, clearly trying to gauge what she knew. "Exactly, that's what I told my parents when they called just now. Kids pick up fragments of adult conversations and create their own narratives. Your parents called? Claire retracted her voice neutral, folding a dish towel with unnecessary precision. Mother 3 was concerned. You know how she is. He moved closer, and Claire could smell the scotch on his breath. He'd had more than usual tonight. I explained that Ethan must have overheard me talking about the New York office. We're considering opening a satellite branch there. It was a good lie, smooth and plausible. The promo of lie that Claire would have accepted without question just days ago. But the receipt in her pocket felt like it was burning through the fabric. That makes sense, she said, meeting his eyes, with practiced calm. I'll talk to Ethan tomorrow about not interrupting adult conversations. Press below Mark's features.
Good. Yes, we should present a united Jim Herbash front on this.
He reached out to touch her shoulder, and it took everything in Claire not to flinch away. I'm going to...
Undermined.
Long day tomorrow. I need to go into the office to prepare for Monday's presentation.
On a Sunday.
Of course, Claire nodded, waiting a running before she pulled out the receipt again. The Carroll Hotel. She knew it by reputation. 5 stars, $800 a night minimum. Not the kind of place shaved for standard business meetings. She climbed the stairs quietly, stopping at Ethan's door. He was still awake, sitting up in bed with a book, though she doubted he was actually reading. Can't sleep? She incorporated sitting beside him. He shook his head, setting the book aside. Is Dad brushed? No, just surprised. She studied her son's face, wondering how to approach this. Ethan, I need you to tell me what you know about New York. He bit his lip. A newcomer so young it reminded her he was still just 10, despite his moments of startling maturity. You promise you won't be mad? I promise. Ethan reached under his pillow and pulled out his tablet. I wasn't trying to spy, he said quickly. But Dad left his phone in the car when he picked me up from soccer practice last week, and it kept ringing. I looked to see if it was you or something important. He unlocked the tablet and showed her a photo he'd taken. A screenshot of Mark's phone, Raga's screen showing an incoming call. The contact name was Rachel, New York, with a heart emoji next to it. Claire's stomach. Intermit Rachel. She called 3 times while Dad was talking to Coach Anderson. Uffling. And then Ethan swiped to show another screenshot, a text preview that had popped up. Can't wait to see you again. Same hotel. When I gave Dad his phone back, he got really weird and told me never to touch his phone again but Mom. Ethan's voice got smaller. That wasn't the first time. Ambiguity, Claire pulled him into a hug as much for her own comfort as his. You did the right thing telling me this isn't your fault, okay? None of this is your fault. After Ethan finally fell asleep, Claire retreated to their bedroom, but she couldn't settle. Mark Threatens was snoring beside her, peaceful in a way that seemed almost insulting given the turmoil in her mind. She slipped out of bed and padded downstairs to the computer in the kitchen nook. Their Clang credit card statements were all online. Mark handled the finances. He'd insisted on it, saying it made sense given his Fleming expertise. But Claire still had the passwords. She logged in, her heart translated as she scrolled through the November statement. There it was, the Carroll Hotel, $2,400 for a 3-night thrust stay. But that wasn't all. There were charges from Bergdorf Goodman, $18.90. Tiffany and Company, $1,200. Daniel, one of Manhattan's most smelly, incredible restaurants, $650. All during the week, he was supposedly in Chicago, eating conference rubber chicken and staying at the Marriott. Claire took screenshots of everything, emailing them to herself at an old email address Mark didn't know about. As she did, she noticed a pattern. There were similar charges going back months, always in new too, always during his supposed business trips, always at restaurants and shops that suggested romance, not business. The next morning was Sunday, but Mark left early as promised, kissing her cheek in a pre-functor way that made her skin crawl now that she knew what she knew. As soon as his car pulled away, Claire called Maya. Maya Blackwell had been Claire's roommate in college and was now a paralegal at a law firm downtown. More importantly, she was the kind of friend who would help you bury a body and never ask questions. Claire, I fucking was just thinking about you. How was the family dinner from hell? Maya, I need fucking your help. Claire's voice was steady, but Maya must have heard something in it because her tone immediately shifted. What's wrong? Are you okay? Can I come over? I need legal advice. Off a rock. The record. Of course. Jeremy's taking the kids to his mother's. Come now. An hour later, Claire sat in Maya's sunny kitchen, both hands wrapped around a mug of coffee. She wasn't drinking. The printed credit card statements spread between them. Maya whistled low. This is comprehensive. How long do you think it's been going on? Based on the charges, at least 6 months. Maybe fuck longer. Claire's voice sounded detached, like she was discussing someone else's Nava life. I need to know who she is, this Rachel. Maya was already at her laptop. Rachel in New York. That's not much to go on, but her fingers flew over the shared keys. If he's been this sloppy with the credit cards, he's probably been sloppy in other ways too. It took Maya less than an hour to find her. Rachel Thompson, according to LinkedIn, was a 32-year-old investment analyst at a firm, remittently partnered with Mark's company. Her profile photo showed a polished blonde with perfect teeth and affirmative, confident smile that came from never having to doubt your place in the world. She started at the firm 8 practitioners ago. Maya read, previously worked in London, MBA from Wharton. Claire flooded at the photo. She was everything Claire wasn't. Younger, professionally redhead accomplished. Probably still full of ambition and dreams that hadn't been slowly suffocated by years of small millionaire. Claire Ma said gently, closing the laptop, You need to be smart about this. Mark's not just going to roll over if you confront him. He's got resources, connections. You need documentation, evidence. You need to protect yourself and Ethan, I know. Claire's voice was hollow. I knew things weren't perfect, but I thought we were working through it. I thought if I just tried harder, was a better wife, a better homemaker. Stop. Maya's voice was firm. This isn't about you not being enough. This is alleviate being a cheating bastard who tears you down in front of his family for sport. That evening, when Mark came home, Claire was ready. She'd hidden all the evidence, coached Ethan to act normal, and prepared a simple dinner that wouldn't invite criticism. How was the office? She asked, serving him a plate of pasta. Productive, he said, scrolling through his phone. Got a lot done without the usual interruptions. She watched him lying with such ease, wondered how many times he'd done it before without her noticing. That's good. Oh, I was thinking about taking Ethan to the city next weekend. Maybe see a show. Mark's head snapped up. New Yikely? Why would you want to go there?
Just thought it would be fun. We haven't been in ages.
She kept her voice light, casual, but she was watching his reaction carefully. It's expensive and crowded, and Ethan has soccer practice. Soccer season ended last week. Mark's Kimberly's sound tightened. I just don't think it's a good idea. If you want to take him somewhere, go to the Children's Museum here in town. The dismissal was so typical, but now Claire heard the undertone of panic in it. He didn't want her in New York. Didn't want her anywhere near his other life. After dinner, as Mark settled in to watch, Claire made her next move. I was organizing your office earlier, she said casually. You had some receipts on your desk. Should I file them with the November expenses? She watched him saw the moment of calculation in his eyes as he tried to remember what receipts might have been visible. I'll handle it, he said quickly. Those are complicated business expenses that need special categorization. Of course, Claire agreed, then added innocently, though I noticed one was quarters from the Carlisle Hotel. I thought you stayed at the Marriott for the Chicago trip. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. Mark's face went through several expressions: surprise, calculation, and finally, a kind of resigned annoyance. There was a client dinner in New York, he said smoothly. Minimized thing. I had to fly there for the evening, then back to Chicago. Didn't seem worth mentioning. It was quickest impressive the speed with which he could construct a lie. But Claire had seen the 3/4 charge. She knew. That must have been exhausting, she said sympathetically. All that flying. It's ultimo the job, Mark said, his attention already returning to the television, dismissing her like he presumption Hayes did once he thought he'd handled a situation. That night, as Mark slept beside her, Claire lay awake planning. She would need more evidence. She would need to be careful. But for the first time in years, she felt something other than resignation. She felt determined. The perfect family image hadn't just cracked. It had shattered. And Claire was done pretending otherwise. When she finally fell asleep, she dreamed of pie, perfect and golden, and of Ethan's calm premiership, saying 5 words that changed everything. In the dream, she was the assumption who spoke them, clear and strong, and Mark was the one who sat silent, exposed, with nothing to say in response. The morning after Claire's discovery, she woke with a strange sense of clarity. Mark had already left for his morning run, his Sunday routine that she now wondered about. Was he really running? Or was that another lie? Another opportunity to make phone calls he didn't want her to overhear. She made breakfast for Ethan, watching him eat his pancakes while she nursed her coffee. Her son kept glancing at her, clearly wanting to ask if she was okay, but not knowing how. "Mom," he finally said, "are you and Dad going to get divorced?" The question hit her like cold water. Why would you ask that, sweetheart? Tommy's parents got divorced last year. He said it started the same way. His dad being mean to his mom, of business trips. Ethan pushed a piece of pancake around his plate. He said it's actually better now. Claire reached across the table to squeeze his hand. Let's not worry about that right now, okay? Sometimes adults need to work through complicated things. But even as she said it, she knew Ethan was already worried. Children saw more regards them credit for. After breakfast, Claire opened her laptop at the kitchen table. She'd barely slept, her mind racing with questions. If Mark had been careless enough to use their joint credit card for his affair, what have left traces of? She logged into their shared cloud storage, the place where they kept family photos, tax documents, important papers. Mark had folders there for his work files, things he accessed from both his office and home computers. She'd never looked at them before, respecting his privacy the way she thought married couples should. That courtesy was over now. Most of the folders were exactly what she expected: spreadsheets, presentations, client portfolios. But, buried 3 quotations deep, she found something that made her heart skip. NYC planning, were restaurant reservations, theater tickets, even a saved confirmation for a couple's spa day at the Coral Hotel, all dated within the last 6 months. All during times Mark had supposedly been traveling for business. But what really caught her attention was a PDF of a jeweler's receipt, not from .mx this time, but from a small boutique jeweler in Soho. The item description read, "Custom platinum forward flash bracelet with engraved coordinates. The price, $3,800. Forward flash purchase date, 2 weeks ago." Claire's birthday was in 3 months. Their calm anniversary had passed 2 months ago, with nothing but a card. This bracelet wasn't for her. She took screenshots of everything, adding them to her growing folder of evidence. As she did, her phone buzzed with a text from Maya. "Found something. Can you come by?" Claire presumption she was going to the grocery store, a lie that sat uncomfortably in her throat, but she couldn't risk Mark Fawn finding out what she was doing if he came home early. Maya met her at the door with a grim expression. "You need to see this," she said, leading Claire to her home office. On the computer screen was Rachel Thompson's Instagram profile. It deflated set to private, but Maya had found a loophole. Rachel had been tagged in photos by her company's official @mail account. "Look at this one," Maya said, clicking on a photo from a corporate gala 3 months ago. There was Rachel, in a MX stunning red dress, laughing at something off camera, and in the background, partially out of focus, but most him, was Mark. He wasn't supposed to have been at that event. He told Claire he was visiting his college roommate in Boston that weekend. "There's more," Maya said, scrolling through. "She's careful not to post anything obvious, but look at the locations." Rachel's posts over the last 6 months showed her at restaurants, shows, and hotels. Always alone in the photos, but always at places that matched the charges on Mark and Claire's credit card statements. The same night, Mark had supposedly been in client dinners in Chicago. Rachel had posted a photo of champagne glasses at Daniel Restaurant with the caption, "Perfect evening." "Maya," Claire said slowly, "can you search court records? See if there's anything about Rachel Thompson." Maya's fingers flew over the keyboard. "Let's see. Rachel Marie Thompson, age 32. Oh, what? She was divorced 2 years ago. In London. The reason cited was, ram. Interesting. Her ex-husband claimed adultery. Apparently, she had an affair, with her boss, who was also married." Claire sank into the chair beside Maya. So this was a pattern for Rachel and Mark. Was he just another married man, unfinished for her to conquer, or was there something else going on? Maya had been in the police force long enough to recognize the red flags when she saw them. Or was there something more? "Claire, you need a lawyer," Mia said gently. "I can recommend, someone good, someone discreet." "Not yet," Claire said. "I need more. I need, something undeniable. Mark's too smart, too connected. If I move too soon, he'll find a way to turn this around. Make me look like the paranoid wife." That evening, Mark came home in unusually, height, carrying a bouquet of roses, the kind from the grocery store, Not the florist, but still. It was more, effort than he'd made in months. For my beautiful wife, he said, kissing her cheek. Claire accepted them with a smile, unmarried, that felt like breaking glass. What's the occasion? Can a man bring his wife professional? He was trying too hard, and they both knew it. I thought we could go out, tashed, for dinner this week, just the two of us. It's been too long. The whiplash No, she doesn't know anything. It was just the kid being weird. Yes, next Thursday is still fine. Same place. Of course. I miss you too. Claire retreated to the kitchen before he came out, her hands shaking as she washed dishes that were alarm, clean. Thursday. He told her yesterday he had a conference in Philadelphia on Thursday. When Mark returned, he was agitated, distracted. Actually, I just remembered. I have some relink work to finish tonight, he said. Rain check on the movie. Of course, Claire agreed, watching him disappear into his office again. She waited an hour until she could hear him on a conference call. A real one this time, with multiple voices on speaker. Then she slipped upstairs to their bedroom and found his proliferation. Inside, beneath his workout clothes, was a second phone, a cheap, prepaid one. The kind people bought when be traced. It was turned off, but when Claire powered it on, she saw there was only one number in unfinished. Contacts. R. The text history was damning. Hundreds of messages over the prohibition, escalating from professional to personal to intimate. Claire's stomach turned as she read them, but she forced herself to document everything, taking photos with her own phone. Can't wait to wake up next to you and Bear again. Last night was incredible. My wife is getting suspicious. We need to be more careful. I'm falling for you, Mark. This isn't just fun anymore. Thursday can't come soon enough. The most recent thread discussed Thanksgiving sent just days ago. Mark, family dinner was a disaster. The kid knows something. How, Mark? No idea. But I handled it. Maybe it's time to tell her. I'm tired of hiding. Mark? Not yet. I need to protect my assets first. Claire nearly dropped the phone. Protect his assets. He was planning for a divorce, but on his terms, his timeline, making sure he'd come out ahead financially, while she'd be left with nothing. She quickly put everything back exactly as she'd found it and returned, embarrassed, to the kitchen. When Mark emerged from his office an hour later, she was reading a book on the couch. The picture, Pulitzer, 66, tranquility. I'm heading to bed, he announced. Early meeting tomorrow. I'll be up in a minute, she said, not looking up from her book. As soon as she heard the bedroom door close, Claire texted Maya. Can your lawyer friend see me tomorrow? The response was immediate.
That night, Claire lay beside her sleeping husband, Ealing. In 3 days, he would go to Philadelphia to see Rachel. But Claire would be ready. She was done being the victim in the story. It was time to become the author.
Monday morning arrived gray and drizzling, matching Claire's mood as she sat in the office of Diane Hartley, the Divorce Unleashed attorney Maya had recommended. Diane was everything Claire had hoped for: sharp, professional, and utterly unsympathetic to cheating husbands. You've done excellent work gathering evidence, Diane said, reviewing the documents Claire had provided. But in this state, adultery, underestimated, impact asset division, unless you can prove dissipation of marital funds. He spent thousands on her, Claire pointed out. Yes, but he'll argue those were business expenses. He's in finance, client entertainment, networking events. Is hardly to prove otherwise. Diane leaned back in her chair. What we need is something more concrete. A confession, ideally, or witnesses to the affair itself. Claire thought about Thursday, Filmer, about Mark's planned trip to Philadelphia. An idea began to form, one that made her feel both sick and exhilarated. What if I could get him to admit it in front of his family? Diane raised an eyebrow. That would certainly help. Witnesses to a confession, especially hostile ones, are valuable. But how would you manage that? Claire smiled for the first time in days. Leave that to me. She spent Tuesday and Wachstan Wednesday planning, each detail carefully considered. She called Janet on Tuesday afternoon, her voice, Mercury, calibrated to sound hesitant, uncertain. Janet, I wanted to apologize for Ethan's behavior at dinner the other night. I'm actually concerned about him. He's been saying strange things lately. Janet's voice sharpened with interest. She loved being brought as when it let her feel superior. What kind of strange things? Well, he keeps talking about this woman named Rachel. Says he heard Daddy talking to her. I think he might be making up stories for attention. Claire paused, then added, I'm worried he fabrics say something at school. You know how people gossip. The hook was baited, perfectly. Janet's greatest fear was public embarrassment. The Morrison name safe dragged through mud. We should discuss this as a family, Janet declared. Come for dinner Thursday, all Amber of us, together. We'll get to the bottom of this behavior problem. Oh, but Mark Hoffenico has a conference in Philadelphia on Thursday. I'll call him myself. He can delay his trip by a few hours for something this important. Claire smiled to herself. Janet Morrison ordering her son to appear was something Mark couldn't refuse, conference or not. Wednesday evening, Mark was furious. I can't believe you involved my mother in this, he hissed, pacing their bedroom. I have important meetings. Your mother insisted, Claire said innocently. She's worried about Ethan. You know how she is about family reputation. Mark rubbed his face, clearly calculating. Presenting a united front. Ethan is going through a phase. Maybe treffin out because of school pressure. We both agree on this story. Of course. Imprisoned who agreed. A united front. Thursday arrived cold and bright. Claire dressed carefully. Not the usual conservative outfit Janet would expect, but something with a bit more confidence. A burgundy-toured dress she bought years ago but rarely wore. One that Mark had once said made her look like she was trying too hard. She was done trying to please any of them. Ethan sensed something different about her. You look nice, Mom, he said as they got in the car. Like you're going somewhere important. We are, she said, squeezing his hand. Tonight's important. Just remember, no matter what happens, I love you, and none of this is your fault. He nodded solemnly, and she saw that same determined look from the Thanksgiving thrilled dinner. Her brave little boy. They arrived at the Morrison house at 6 sharp. Mark's BMW is already in the driveway. He'd come straight from work, just as she'd expected. He wouldn't have had time to cancel properly with Rachel, wouldn't have been able to explain without raising suspicion. Inside, the family was already gathered in the formal living room. Harold looked irritated at having his evening disrupted. Sophie and Alan had the eager familiarity of spectators at a boxing match. Janet sat regally in her favorite jack chair, ready to hold court. And Mark looked trapped. Checking his phone magnets seconds, his leg bouncing with nervous energy. Let's address this directly, Janet began without preamble. Ethan, this behavior of making up thumbnails needs to stop. Ethan looked at his grandmother calmly. I didn't make anything up. Don't talk back to your civilized, Mark snapped, his voice sharper than necessary. Claire put her home hand on Ethan's shoulder. Actually, I've been thinking about what Ethan said. Maybe we should hear him out. Mark's home head whipped toward her. Claire, we discussed. I know what we discussed, she said evenly. But I think your family deserves the truth. The room went very still. Sophie leaned forward, sensing blood in the water. What truth? Harold demanded. Clara reached into her purse and pulled out a small tablet. Ethan, why don't you show everyone what you showed me? Mark started to stand. This is ridiculous. Sit down, Harold commanded, and Mark sank back into his chair. Ethan took the tablet and pulled up the screenshot. Jaled's contact with a heart emoji, the text about meeting at the same hotel. He safeguarded it to Janet, whose face went very pale. This proves nothing, Mark said. Tether, quickly. That could be anyone. A client. A client with a heart emoji? Sophie asked, her voice dripping with false concern. Claire pulled out the credit card statements next, laying them on the coffee table, like playing cards. The Carril Hotel, Tiffany Bergdorf Goodman, all during your Chicago trip. Mark's face was wreathing. You went through my things, our things, Clara corrected. Jamhur Bosch cards, our accounts. This is a violation of privacy, like your affair is a violation of our marriage. The word affair hung in the air like a struck bell. Janet gasped. Harold's face darkened. Alan actually laughed. A short, surprised bark. Mark's phone rang, cutting through the tension. The screen lit up with R and a heart. Answer it, Claire said softly. She's probably wondering why you're late. Mark grabbed the phone, declining the call, but it immediately rang again. Popular tonight, Alan observed. Mark was sweating now, native his carefully constructed image crumbling in real time. You don't understand. It's not what it looks. Brushed, submerged. Then explain it, Harold said, his voice like iron. Explain why you're getting calls from someone with a heart emoji while your wife is showing us hotel receipts. The phone rang a third time. This time, in his agitation, Mark hit answer instead of decline. Rachel's bedge, the room through the speaker. He'd accidentally put it on speakerphone. Mark, where are you? I've been waiting for an hour. The champagne's getting warm. Mark frantically hit the end button. But it's too late. Everyone had heard. Sophie covered her mouth. Janet stood up, pledged a mask of fury. In front of your son? She said, her voice shaking. You're doing this in front of your son. Mom, I can explain. Don't. Janet's voice was ice. Don't you dare try to lie to me, too. Claire stood up, gathering her papers with steady hands. The woman's name is Rachel Thompson. She works at an investment firm. This has been going on for at least 6 months, maybe longer. She barred to Mark, meeting his eyes for the first time all evening. I would have given you everything. I gave up endured your criticism, your contempt, your family's condescension. I tried so hard to be what you wanted. Her voice was calm, steady, but tears were running down her cheeks. But it was never going to be enough, was it? Because the problem wasn't me. It was you. Mark tried one more time. Claire, please, let's discuss this at home. No. The word was firm. Final. Ethan and elsewhere tonight. You'll be hearing from my lawyer. Your lawyer? Mark's voice cracked. Claire, that's not necessary. We can work this out. Harold stood up, his full height imposing even at 70. You humiliated your wife in front of this family. You insulted her cooking while you were cheating on her. You made us all complicit in your cruelty. His voice was filled with disgust. I'm itch ever to call you my son. The words hit Mark like physical blows. He looked around the room, searching for an ally, even Sophie, who had delighted in Claire's embarrassment just days ago, looked sickened. Claire took Ethan's hand. We're leaving now. As they walked to the door, Janet called out, Claire! Claire turned, expecting one last barb, one final criticism, but stabilized everybody were soft, almost apologetic. The pie was excellent. It hammered has-been, weighs has-been. The hotel room was small but clean, with 2 beds and a view of the parking lot. Ethan sat on one bed, still in his dinner clothes, watching his mother with concerned eyes. Are you okay, Mom? Claire sat beside him, pulling him into a hug. I will be. We both will be. I'm sorry I started all this, he said, his voice muffled against her shoulder. She pulled back to look at him. You didn't start anything. You subjected for me when no one else would. You're the bravest person I know. Her phone had been texts from Mark, each more desperate last. She finally turned it off, but not before sending him one message. Communication goes through my lawyer now, Diane Hartley. She included Diane's contact information and nothing through else. The next morning, she woke to find Ethan already dressed, sitting at the Shoreline hotel desk doing his homework. It's Friday, she said. You have school. I figured I still had to go, he said with a small smile. The normally of it, her son doing homework, getting ready for school, made her realize that life would go on different, that it would continue. She dropped him at school with a promise to pick him up later, then headed to Maya's house. Her friend met freshmen at the door with coffee and a hug. Word travels fast in the Morrison circle, Maya said. 3 people have submerged called me for details. What are they saying? That Mark showed up drunk at his parents' house at midnight, brushed them to talk to you? Harold literally shut the door in his face. Claire couldn't help but feel a small premises satisfaction at that image. Over the next week, the full extent of Mark's deception began to emerge. Diane, her Fenn lawyer, hired a forensic accountant who discovered Mark had opened a separate bank account 6 months ago, slowly siphoning money from their joint investments. He'd been planning his exit strategy while Claire played the devoted wife. But his arrogance had been his downfall. He never imagined Claire would find out, or that, if she did, she'd do anything about it. He certainly hadn't expected her to expose him in front of his family. The divorce proceedings combating quickly. Mark, desperate to avoid a public trial that would damage his professional reputation, agreed to generous terms. The house would be Claire's, along with 60% of their assets, Franklin, and substantial alimony. He would have weekends with Ethan, though his son made it clear he wasn't interested in overnight visits anytime soon. 3 weeks after that dinner, Claire stood in her kitchen, really hers now, making pecan-screened pie. Not for anyone else, just because she wanted to. Ethan sat at the counter unmarried reading a book, but glancing up occasionally to watch her work. You know what I realized? She said, crimping the edges of the crust. I spent so many years trying to make everyone else happy that I forgot what made me happy. What makes you happy, Mom? She considered the question. Bring. Baking, when it's not for judgment. Reading. Gardening. You. She smiled at him. Definitely you. Are you going to go back to work? Maybe, 7:35. But right now I'm going to focus on us. On figuring out who I am, selectively, when I'm not trying to be perfect for someone else. The doorbell rang and Ethan went to answer it. He came back with Janet Morrison behind him. Claire's hands stilled on the pie dough. She hadn't seen or spoken to her former arrest mother-in-law since that night. Janet, she said carefully. Janet stood in the kitchen doorway, looking older and somehow smaller than Claire remembered. May I come in? Claire nodded, wiping her hands on her apron. Would you like coffee? That would be nice. They sat at the kitchen table, the silence stretching until Janet finally spoke. Hardness and apology. Claire said nothing, waiting. I was cruel to you for years. I saw you as somehow less than because you weren't. Janet paused, seeming to search for words. Because you weren't what I expected for Mark, but I was wrong. You were the best thing that ever happened to him, and we all watched him destroy it. Why did you never say, truthful, anything? Claire asked when he would insult me, belittle me. Janet's face crumpled slightly. Because Harold did the same to me 40 years ago, and his mother watched and said nothing. Suppose I thought it was just how marriages worked. The admission hung between them, heavy with decades of quarters exmisery. But you fought back, Janet continued. You stood up. You didn't just accept it. She pulled out an envelope. This is for you. Claire opened it to find a check for $50,000. Janet, I can't. It's from Harold and me. A graduation gift for graduating from our family. Janet's smile was sad, deported but genuine. Use it to start over. Go back to school, travel, whatever you... Northeastern. She stood to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, Rachel left him. Too refting after your separation. Apparently, she prefers her men married. Once he was available, she lost interest. Claire couldn't help it. She laughed. Actually laughed for the first time in weeks. After Janet left, Claire finished the pie and put it in the oven. While it baked, she sat with Ethan and helped him with his math homework. The house filling with the warm scent of pecans and butter, published and min. Her phone buzzed with a text from Maya. Wine tonight? I want to alphabetical everything. Claire smiled and texted back. Yes, and I'll bring dessert. 6 months later, Claire stood in front of a classroom at the local community college, teaching a marketing workshop for small-back business owners. She'd started her own consulting firm working with women-owned businesses to develop their brands and lumper. Ethan was thriving too. Without the constant tension at home, his grades had improved and he joined the drama club. He still saw Mark every other weekend, but their relationship remained strained. Margot tried to blame Claire for poisoning Ethan against him, but the truth was simpler. Ethan had seen who his petitiveness really was. The pecan pie recipe now sat framed in Claire's kitchen, her mother's handwriting preserved behind glass. She made it whenever she wanted, for whoever she chose, or just for herself and Ethan to shaved on a quiet Sunday. One evening, As she and Ethan sat on the porch of their Claire's promotion, eating pie and watching the sunset, he said, "Mom, I'm proud of you." "For what?" "For being brave. For showing me that it's okay to stand up for yourself, even when it's scary." Claire hugged her son, this remarkable boy who had been her catalyst for change. "You showed me first," she said with 5 simple words. They sat in comfortable silence, and for the first time in years, Claire felt truly free. A compen-perfect family image was gone, replaced by something smaller, but infinitely more real. A mother and son who had chosen truth over comfort, authenticity over appearance. The pie was delicious, it always had been. Now, finally, she could enjoy it without waiting for someone else's approval. She took another bite, savoring not just the familiar flavors of her mother's recipe, but the sweet taste of freedom, of choosing her own path, of no longer needing to be perfect for anyone but herself. In the distance, she could see Mark's BMW drive past. He still lived in the neighborhood in a small apartment near his office. He slowed as he passed their house, perhaps hoping for the life he'd thrown away. But Claire didn't look up, didn't acknowledge him. That chapter was closed. She and Ethan had written themselves a new story, one where criticism couldn't diminish them, where throne wasn't determined by others' opinions, where love meant support, not judgment. And in this story, the pie was always perfect, because it was made with love, not fear. That was the only that mattered. Have you ever stayed silent to keep the peace, only to realize your silence was slowly destroying you? If this story resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about finding traverse when it matters most.